we go. You're on. Good evening, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First up, under Hearing the Citizens, we have a special person here tonight, a longtime school district activist, a parent, a concerned parent, grandparent, activist in school district affairs, former employee, all of the above, and a frequent visitor to many of our meetings over many years. It's an honor to have her here tonight as the first citizen who showed up under the new format to express herself. She feels strongly enough, and so I now give you Mrs. Lynette Vannucci. Lynette, please give your name and address and begin. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Lynette Vannucci. I live at 1156 West 23rd Street. I first have to thank Ms. Jones, your secretary to the board, for her kindness towards me, and also the superintendent's secretary. They were very accommodating, and it's nice to know you have these wonderful people working for all of us. Hello to John Harkins, president of the board, all board members, the superintendent. I appreciate the fact that I can speak this evening. I know you had to come up with a plan by August 31st, a difficult plan. 2 days in school, 3 days online. I'm sorry. I'm hoping that maybe in 6 weeks, we can look at this and be able to make some changes. My own personal opinion, you cannot take the place of a good teacher knowing their subject matter. Reaching our children, teaching them, answering their questions, testing them. They're so important, and our students need that. They need to be in the building, even if it's split sessions eventually. Online, from March to June, I'm sure you know, there were a lot of no grades given. I know that we received the booklet. It's very nicely put together, but online for some students can work. Very intelligent students who can do it on their own. But the majority of our children, especially middle and high school, they need the teacher. They need to be able to review, they need to ask questions, and they need to, a lot of times, just to be able to make that connection with a teacher. I worked in this district for 17 years. I know the importance of excellent teaching. It's so important to students. I know that we could be in this whatever until January or February. If, God willing, we do get a vaccine and it does come to pass, the elderly in homes, veterans' homes, our police and fire departments, our hospital workers, doctors, nurses, they're going to come first. When they get around to us, it might be January or February. Can our students lose all that time in school in front of their teacher? I'm sure we can work something out where the students can be in at least a split session, maybe something like 8 to 12, 1 to 5, but maybe one day online to give teachers a chance to catch up. And the schools, I know, have to be sterilized each day and on possibly weekends. But there has to be a better way. And I was so distressed. I have a granddaughter and I have a great granddaughter who's so excited about being a preschooler. And my granddaughter goes to collegiate. And I'm when I see what happened to our seniors, it was heartbreaking. No prom, no banquet, no senior day, no graduations. I mean, I know you did the best you could, but it was sad. I remember standing on my porch clapping. Not anybody else on my street was out, but two young boys across the street who came out, they started clapping, and the 10-year-old yelled over, why are we clapping? And I said, we were told to come out at 7 o'clock and clap for 10 minutes for our graduating seniors. Oh, okay. And they stood there with me across the street clapping, and then their dad came out and started clapping. But in all seriousness, taking away the senior year from those students was heartbreaking. And the catching up, it's scary. And I know that there's a lot of problems. I know that you're trying to find a way to do the best you can, but we could be 6 to 7 months old. I'm sorry, 6 to 7 months of this. I know my time is up. I hope you can talk things over, and I hope we can come up with a much better plan. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lynette. This situation is in flux and ever changing. And if you want to stick around, the superintendent's going to report to us on this important matter. So you're welcome to stay. Next item is the health and safety plan with the superintendent, Mr. Polito, and his assistant, Teresa Zumagali, and Mr. Brock, and the executive director of operations. Mr. Polito.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Ms. Benucci, for sharing your thoughts. Unfortunately, today I don't have very good news for the school board about our health and safety plan. There's been a couple pretty major developments here over the last couple of days that we really need to consider as we think about the start of school. The first one, of course, is the increase in the case count in Erie County. As you saw yesterday, we had 41 cases. Right now, the percent of positive cases, this just today did pop over 5%, which Secretary Levin has indicated is a warning sign that we're starting to have community spread. So that has us concerned about bringing students back to school here in the fall. And the other issue, which we've been talking about here for the last month, is ventilation in the buildings. And we did contract with our engineers and architects to go through all our buildings to evaluate our HVAC systems and make sure we had adequate outside airflow as recommended by the CDC. And that report was due on on August 14th. However, last week, Mr. Brockman started to receive some pieces of that report. And we thought maybe we could get the architects and engineers in earlier to talk about some of the findings so that we could get started on repairs sooner rather than later and not wait till the August 14th report came out. So we had that meeting with them on Monday, and it became apparent very quickly that our issues are greater than what we had initially anticipated. I'm going to share my screen. So this is my summary, but our architects did confirm that it's reasonably accurate. Just based on our conversations, I categorized our buildings into green, yellow, or red. And the green buildings have sufficient airflow from our HVAC systems, but do need some minor adjustments to make sure that they're working properly. And the green buildings, we feel we could have them up and running by the start of school, no problem. The yellow buildings, they do have an adequate system, but there are some repairs that are needed. We feel it may take a little longer, so we set kind of a target date for those buildings for the first quarter, the end of the first quarter, which is November 4th. And then our big issue right now are the red buildings. We have and I'll scroll down here. We have one building at the elementary level, one at the middle school level, and all of our high school locations that right now have no outside airflow other than when we open the windows. And that's just not adequate to bring students back safely. And the work that needs done on those buildings are major renovations. Many of these renovations were planned as part of our facilities plan, but it's not anything we're going to be able to adjust in the short term. So based on that, it started us really rethinking our approach to this year. And as you know, I've been a strong advocate for getting as many kids back in school as possible. But with this new information, I just don't see any way, especially at the high school and middle school level, that we're going to be able to safely bring those kids back just because of the ventilation issue. So at this point, and we wanted to have this discussion with the board tonight, we are proposing some modifications to our plan. So number one, and a lot of school districts in the county have already made this move. We just feel we need a little more time for professional development for our teachers to get them ready for the new online platform. And we also need a little more time to get the buildings ready and get our Chromebooks put together for our students. The last shipment is scheduled to be here on August 24th. So we would propose moving the first day for students back until September 8th, which is after Labor Day. And Teresa and Karen are going to talk a little bit more about the professional development in a little bit. For the rest of the district, and again, this is certainly not my initial or first preference, but in order to make sure we can address some of the airflow issues, especially at the elementary level, we would recommend that we start the year 100% remote and have that run through the first quarter. And again, I think our focus here, looking at where we are with the buildings, is to focus on our elementary schools and get them ready so that we can bring our elementary students back as soon as possible. And again, looking at that previous chart, we only have one building that we have significant issues at the elementary level, and that's Edison. So what we would propose is taking that first 2 months to really make sure that the ventilation is working properly in all those buildings, and then bringing the students back on November 4th at the elementary level with one adjustment. If you look at the chart again, Edison has some pretty significant issues with airflow, and that is slated to have a total renovation in 2 years. The middle schools, you can see that East is in good shape, so we would propose bringing the Edison students back to East to be educated from that building because the airflow is sufficient at that point. And then for the middle and high school, we would propose continuing to keep them online with making every effort to try to get the airflow taken care of in those buildings. But at this point, I don't want to be too optimistic because based on what we've heard from the architects, those renovations are going to be long-term. So likely we would have to be online for the middle and high school students until spring when it warms up enough that we could open the windows and bring students back. And then the last item that I wanted to point out in the change, in every one of our buildings, we do have some rooms with proper ventilation. And throughout this, we wanted to prioritize the students that really needed that in-person instruction, and that would be our self-contained special education students and our career and tech students. So based on our survey of the buildings, we feel we have adequate space to bring those students back starting in September 8th. So we would propose to do that and at least to provide that in-person instruction for those students.
Mr. Polito,
Yes.
could you remind us whose standard it is we're measuring our ventilation system and airflow sufficiency by? Is it county health, state health, state department, our own?
It's both federal and state guidelines, so that the CDC recommendations, as well as the Department of Education recommendations, indicate that we need to ensure that our ventilation systems are working properly before we can return students safely.
Is this a result of the crisis we're in, or was this an ongoing, ever-present standard?
This is a result of the crisis we're in.
Okay.
We've had ventilation issues in our buildings for a long time. And, Mr. Harkins, as you know, we've come off a 10-year financial crisis, and many of our buildings really didn't receive the maintenance and preventative maintenance that they should have over the last several years. So a number of the systems just are not working properly. And school buildings like Collegiate and Wilson just don't have outside airflow. They have more of a baseboard heating system, so there isn't any unit ventilators in the classroom that provide that outside air, which is what they're recommending.
I understand. I'm not questioning, and I'm aware that you and Neil have been talking to us about this long ago, long before the hint of this crisis. So I just wanted to clarify who sets the standards and how it happened. You had expressed an interest and made every effort to try to be flexible and ready for any eventuality when the time comes to start school, and that's to your credit, I believe. And now it appears that that flexibility is also calling into play your pledge to do what was safe. So if things are shifting in that direction, is there a point at which you want to make that call, or are we nearing that, or are we at that? You want to need our approval, a meeting?
Yeah, you're hearing that from me right now. We do have the architect scheduled to come next week and speak in more detail. And they have assured us for those buildings in red that if we open the windows, that there would be adequate ventilation. But that, to me, that's just not a workable solution in the wintertime here in the Erie. I just don't think that that's an approach that I'm comfortable with, or the families will be comfortable with moving forward.
Okay, by this discussion, the public's going to hear with the numbers up and the ventilation problem that we're moving in the direction of online learning for the first quarter. I just wondered at some point if you wanted to, if we need to make that official, or do you want to wait till after that report comes in, or however you want to do it. I know there's board members that will want to discuss this too. So I told Angela McNair has her hand raised. Angela?
Yes, as you all have gotten my list that I emailed you earlier, and I'm not going to go through the whole list, but I am going to mention a few things that I did. And Brian, thank you for addressing several of those items that was on my list. And those were concerns that I had even previous to the numbers going up in Sumner as well. So we're right back to where Sumner had raised this situation last meeting, and that I agree with him, is that, starting remotely is what we need to do. And with reviewing, because I actually did this time keep my word and look at the items that you sent us in our email, I saw where the buildings that are not adequate, many of them are not adequate, even for the plan, even for what I mentioned, which you also mentioned in your report, was to bring back the elementary school students, which are our priority, because this elementary school, this is their fundamental years. This is the time where, those students are learning how to read, how to count, how to do the things that they need to do to even move on to middle and high school. So I do feel like they're a priority. And once again, I'm advocating for our special education students, for those families who want their students to return to the buildings. And I feel like you made a good point, and which is something that I had also raised a question for, was about moving buildings. At this point, I don't think any families would have an issue with not being at the building that they were supposed to, due to the many life adjustments that people have had to make in general. So a couple of things that I was still had out there that I was wondering about was the live streaming of the classrooms. Is there going to be any way that these teachers can do live streaming? Many parents have many concerns, including myself, where we need to, the teacher could be in the classroom live streaming just like as if the kids were in the room and they all have to be logged on. Or is there, for those students who will be attending, will there still be a dress code? Will all of those rules still be in effect that were in before? I know that a lot of health and safety rules will change, but are we relaxing on our dress code? Is that still, being in uniform a part of health and safety? That's the question that people are asking. And also with the students not being in the classrooms, is there going to be some type of discussion about continuing like the PEBT cards and things like that? I feel like that's all a part of health and safety due to the fact that these kids are going to be at home, and it's a part of their health and safety to know if they're eating, because they're not eating at school, breakfast, lunch, or whatever they get at school. So are we going to advocate for the governor to keep providing the EBT cards to families? That's another one of my questions. Also, I know that I mentioned to Elena at the Early Learning Resource Center, how is this going to affect childcare? Because a lot of parents have some way or shape or form accommodated themselves to be able to be home with the kids during these summer months, but they were anticipating going back to work. And I know that's not even, with what's going on, we can't even think like that anymore. But that's the reality that a lot of parents are like now, they're going to be relying on childcare. Is the school district going to provide some type of support to the childcare centers? And I know that we're all having a meeting on, I believe, Friday or sometime soon. I got a link to a meeting, but that's the question too that I want you guys to keep in mind. And then also, just the technical assistance. When you closing down these buildings, are we closing down Eagles Nest? Are we closing down Booker T. Washington Center and Emerson Gridley? Are they included in this situation? Are we going to check their ventilation systems, or how are we going to monitor their health and safety in our off-site locations? Because I don't see their buildings of those locations in this report. And then I also, I know, I just did this list earlier, just to know how many special education students are there, how many have severe special education needs, the levels, so that we know how many students, if we do decide to say, hey, we're going to let the special education students in, when, in September 8th, we're just going to start off with the special education students, so that we know they're socially distanced and we know they're in properly ventilated schools. What does that number look like? And then also, are we, is this something that we need to talk about with our governor or our funding sources? Are we, if all these parents got to stay home with their kids, would the parents be receiving a stipend? Because the kid, I know those are their kids, but also as well, now they're their tutors, their teachers, they're partnering with the district. So we need to find a way to support that. Are we going to have the hotspots that we need? Because I know a lot of parents are complaining that they're getting one Chromebook for 3 kids. If their teachers are live streaming, which I think they should, or even if it's teachers for grade levels, if it's a 3rd grade teacher that's live streaming to all the 3rd graders, it might not be a teacher for every classroom like how it is when we're open, but if a teacher is live streaming, they could be live streaming to all of 3rd grade. But we need to know how many more additional Chromebooks we need to be given out, because some families have 4 or 5 students and they need more than one Chromebook. So we need to figure that out. And with the money that we're going to have to reallocate some funding that we're not going to be using for things that we usually have to use them for when we're open. So how are we going to redistribute that funding? And I'm not trying to talk forever, but these are very important questions. These are very important points. And obviously they're important because Brian included several of these points that I made in his report just now. So, because every student has a dollar amount attached to their seat. So how are we going to reallocate the funding, or how we do? Are we going to reallocate it? Are we going to look at the funding for each student and see how we can support the families better with that funding? So I just really feel like that's something to look at too. And then also with health and safety comes along, if we are going to take our special needs students, there are many concerns with the buses, because I keep bringing up the buses. but I'm not hearing enough feedback about what's going on with the buses. Because when you say we're going to bring back the special education students, now we have a busing issue because a lot of those students are being bused. So therefore, our bus drivers want to know, what's the protocol when a child gets on the bus and showing signs of being ill? Are they, how do they let, does the bus end up just stopping, or what if they're on the bus stop and the parent is not there? How is that whole situation going to play out? That's something to think about. How they're going to take the temperatures on the bus? Are there going to be additional aides on the buses? And also, how are the routes going to go now if we just let certain students come in at the beginning of the school year?
Angela, can you bring it to an end so that we can get some answers?
I'm moving towards the end. I'm moving towards the end, but also these are the employees' questions too. So these questions is very important. I also sent in my email. If some of these meetings goes to however long they need to go to. So I'm going to finish.
That's how you see it, Angela, but we've got 7 or 8 other important issues besides this, and no other board member has gotten to speak yet.
Okay. And I understand that. And you know what, John, you keep doing
responsibility to get us through this meeting, and I intend to do it. I ask for your cooperation. Thank you.
Okay, but you know what? You got a very terrible attitude. You're screaming and hollering. You doing this every meeting, not only with me, but now you're doing it with Sumner. Y'all are arguing during the meetings. I hope you know that the public are watching these meetings and they see how disrespectful you are being as a president of the board. So when December comes time and they start re-electing board presidents again, I want you and Tyler and Darlene and everybody else who said that I had such a explosive attitude to realize what's happening during these meetings.
Angela, we owe the public better than this.
I know we do. So what I would suggest is you let me finish my questioning, because some of these questions were sent to me by employees who want to hear me ask them, who are watching the YouTube and they want to hear their questions asked and answered. These is not all just questions. The first part of the questioning that I emailed you are my questions. These best questions are sent directly from employees and they deserve answers too.
Okay, Angela, but we've got to get to the point where the answer.
Okay, well, if you quit interrupting me, I can get to the end of my questions. I just told you that.
It's been more than 10 minutes since you began.
Okay, well, what you want? Okay, well, if you wasted my time, I could have been done asking my questions if you had not interrupted me. I would have been already done.
I'll stop if you will.
Okay, well, I'm just telling you, I had 3 more questions and you just wasted 5 minutes. So anyway, when the students show signs of COVID, whose responsibility is it? If they throw up on the bus, is there nursing staff that will be available to come to the buses? And how are they supposed to dispose of body fluids and things like that? Are there going to be limitations on like what they can bring on the bus? These are all very good questions. And with school only being a few weeks away, we need to be able to have these questions in the air and answer for students and staff to know how to be safely entering the buses and entering the schools. And also, is there going to be, my last question is there going to be a COVID response team for the transportation, and will they be receiving hazard pay? Some of the people that still are going to have direct contact with the students in the buildings would like to know, will they be receiving hazardous pay? And that's the end of my questioning. And I just want to let you know, I'm getting text messages from citizens right now who feel like you're being disrespectful. Thank you.
Tell them I have a job to do for the board and the community. We've got 8 or 9 other important matters. The
community wanted to hear this. This is what the community asked you to do.
I'll be answered tonight. We're going to all try to participate in this discussion and bring this to some conclusion. We just can't ramble endlessly and repeat ourselves.
This was not rambling. How dare you disrespect me and tell me I'm rambling when every last thing that I said was a valid point?
You said them more than once, Angela. I don't.
Very disrespectful. Very disrespectful. Thank you.
All right, I'll note that. Now, can we move on?
I want some answers to some of my questions.
That's what I'm trying to do, Angela, but I can't do it when you're talking.
Well, I can't get my points out when you keep interrupting me.
Mr. Polito, do you have answers to any of those questions or a response, please?
Yes, and I'm gonna go from your email, Angela, to start. First of all, and Erica, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have an email address for staff to send questions.
We do. We
Okay.
do.
So Angela, I would strongly encourage, if you get questions from the staff, to have them send that right to that email address, because we do have a staff portal with FAQs in it. So we want to continue to update that and make sure that any questions that any employee asks, that all employees have the opportunity to see that in the portal. For the first question about the students with physical disabilities, the ones that we were going to be bringing into the school, Angie, would you be able to answer that question for me?
Yeah, I can answer some of it. So we're talking about around 300 students, but we've been calling these parents and we've been asking them, about their preference. Even before, this happened, we had started doing that because we had always intended to allow those students to return, face to face. So we've been calling those parents. Some of them are still on the fence. Some of those parents have definitely told us they do not want their children to return. They're concerned about the virus. Others have said that, they definitely want their children to return, and some are still on the fence. So as far as how many of those 300 are still, are going to be returning, I don't have a definite answer about that yet. We're still working on those numbers. So as far as that goes, were there other questions too related to that population?
The second question was, can we fit them into one building? And we're not, right now, we're not proposing putting them all in one building. We want to maintain them in the building that they were initially intended to attend, out of consistency, if at all possible. And at this point, we believe we have enough room to accomplish that in those buildings. If at all possible, can the lower grade students attend in person and the older remote? And yes, that is absolutely what our plan is. We want to focus on getting the elementary students back into the schools and in person as quickly as possible. As far as the money spent on PPE, Mr. Brockman, I believe we had $1 million allocated out of CARES funding for PPE.
That is correct.
Okay. The live streaming for the classrooms, yes, that's absolutely what we intend to do. And going along with that question, the board did approve at the last meeting the purchase of Chromebooks for all students. So every student will receive either a Chromebook or an iPad. So that should eliminate the issue that families with multiple children had at the end of last school year. As far as a dollar amount attached to each student, the state funding formula does not necessarily work that way because of the hold harmless. So we do get some of our money is tied to a per pupil formula, but it's a very minor amount of the overall allocation. And we will not be, our budget will not be impacted if we decide to open remotely instead of in person. As far as reimbursement for food and other supplies, I don't think that that's something that we have the ability to do. I see Mr. Attorney Walker shaking his head. No?
That is correct. I don't believe that to be an authorized use of the CARES funding or other funding from the school district.
Okay. And Ms. McNair asked about the child care centers. Yes, there was a meeting. I think we're still scheduled to have that meeting on Friday, Erica.
We are.
We certainly want to support the child care centers as much as we can and provide as much information about what our plans are so that they can adjust their plans accordingly as well. Is there anything else you would want to add to that, Erica?
Just that I've already had preliminary discussions with the YMCA in particular, and they are very busy trying to adapt their operations to what several local school districts need. So they're waiting for some clarity and finality on plans, as I'm sure some other child care providers are, but we will talk about that on Friday.
And just one quick second, Erica, just so that you know, I know that the YMCA and St. Martin Center are some of the larger childcare facilities, but there are childcare facilities that have 100, 150 students in them that are not the YMCA. So I know we have a meeting Friday, but I know that B collected and myself met with the ELRC, who's over the providers, and they have lists so that, you know, just not one YMCA is not the only provider. There's hundreds of providers in this city, and we all need the same information.
Right. Thank you, Angela. The meeting that I scheduled for Friday is that same meeting in conjunction with the ELRC. So they have extended the invite to that meeting to all sorts of childcare providers of various sizes throughout our area.
Are there any other board members who have questions and comments on this topic?
Mr. Harkins, I have a couple more questions here I wanted to get through with.
Go ahead.
Technical assistance offered by the district with other facilities. Yes, I had a preliminary conversation with the MLK Center about that, and we're trying to coordinate a meeting to talk about what our plans are and how they can support us, especially if we move to remote instruction, and how we can support them with training and other assistance to give them an opportunity to provide a space for students to come to when we are closed. The off-site learning facilities, yes, I feel strongly that, you know, we need to follow the same schedule at both Eagles Nest and the Booker T. Washington Center, as we're doing with all our other buildings. We want to maintain consistency across the district as much as possible. Ms. McNary mentioned the DePaulo Center. That is one that we're still working through. There are a couple programs down there, especially in our alternative ed program, where there's components for behavior health and mental health. And we may end up recommending that some of those be in person, just so that those students can get those supports that they need to move forward. And as far as stipends to families, again, that's, you know, I think I would defer to the previous questions. I don't believe that's something under the school code that we have authorization to do.
Mr. President?
Neil.
I at least want to mention this, that many of the questions that Ms. McNair asked, one of the bus stewards from Local 95 sent me an email requesting many of those answers, asking some of the very same questions. And at some point tomorrow, I am prepared to send my answers to Local 95 and the bus drivers.
Could you send the copy to the board members so that would help clarify some of this that's been asked?
I most certainly can.
Thanks, Neil. Mr. Polito, are you finished answering?
I believe so, unless there's anything, Ms. McNair.
There are more, that's why I'm asking.
No, I don't have any other questions. The only thing is, Neil, I appreciate if, you getting those answers back to them, because those were some of the same questions that they had last time but it was just so much going on that they really, you really couldn't answer them at that time. But now that we are having an opportunity to kind of think things through a little bit more, if you can get back to them, the bus drivers, as soon as possible. And I thank you, Mr. Polito, for going through my list respectfully and answering each question as best as you can. That's all I ask for, and thank you.
Darlene, Mrs. Feeney?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple follow-up questions. And again, I don't want to belabor this. So Brian, if you plan on making more presentations next week, if I ask these questions and you say, you want to do that next week, I'm perfectly fine with that. So my first question was, when we talk about the self-contained classrooms for special education students, is that going to be elementary, middle, and high? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
And
okay.
on that, I'm working with Attorney Gorman on the line as well.
Yes, that's our intention. All the self-contained programs at the elementary, middle, and high school level would have that option.
So I'm a little concerned when we're looking at Erie High, and I'm just going to express the concern, and then it's something you can get back to me on, but I'm a little concerned if we're saying that we don't think that instruction can work at Erie High, that if we're putting our most vulnerable students that have health issues. So that we need to look at that a little bit more carefully before we move with the high school kids. The second question I guess I had is, Angie, I think I know the answer to this question, but for the rest of the board and the public that's watching, can you specifically tell us what those specialities are, what classrooms we're talking about when we talk about those special needs students?
We're talking about our life skills support students, our autistic support students, and our emotional support students. Because those are the students in our self-contained programs. The other students, like students who have a specific learning disability or speech, those students are typically in classrooms with their typical peers. And A, they won't have typical peers right now, and B, these students that we're talking about are in small classrooms to begin with, and they're only with one teacher and the same support staff all day, so that minimizes the risk of any type of viral spread.
So a follow-up on that, Angie, if you wouldn't mind, then would they be doing their therapy virtually? So would their speech therapy be remote as well? I don't know how we do occupational therapy remote, but I'm sure there probably is a way to do that. Would that be happening?
Well, we did that when we were on shutdown, but that wasn't the plan. We did have planned for them to do that face-to-face as well, and just to make sure that the staff are equipped with the appropriate PPE, and we're looking at having the plexiglass dividers and just putting as much protection as we can in place.
Okay, and I'm going to probably follow up with more questions throughout the week, Angie, but I appreciate that. And something that Brian, you said that I'd like to follow up with possibly Erica. So we had, as a board, had sent questions to our board secretary, Alyssa, and she had put those on a document that Lori had suggested on board docs. I know not all the questions were able to be answered, and at some point, I think, I haven't double checked it today, those questions might have been answered, but at some point, I don't think all those questions were answered. So I'm wondering if we are going to continue to use that format, or if you want us to now start asking those questions under the frequently asked question portal that's on the district website.
I would prefer if you just funnel them through the secretary's office, so we have somebody that just keeps track of them all. And I know, Ms. Feeney, that you did send in a number of questions right before the vote last time. And, I did talk to Teresa today. She has been working on them, but a lot of that, the question answering got put aside when we found out about the ventilation, and we just felt we needed to focus on bringing you a recommendation to keep things moving for the start of the school year. So we will have those answered and in that portal probably by the end of the week for you.
Well, thank you, Brian. I assume that is what happened, that we had to regroup because of the ventilation plans.
Just for the ventilation, you mentioned about safety at Erie High. Every one of our buildings has some rooms that have proper ventilation. My chart was more of a broad stroke, just giving you a general overview of what they are. The architects and engineers have gone through the buildings, and certainly as we develop our plans and think about bringing kids back, we will make sure that the rooms that we're assigning them to do have adequate ventilation without opening the windows.
And again, following up, and I think I had directed this question to you earlier, is that we would be looking at entrances to the building so that they didn't have to walk or move throughout an entire building where some areas might not have good ventilation system. If there's a way for us to easily make it accessible to a doorway where we know we can provide proper ventilation. And again, that's because these students, we really need to look at their medical frailty.
Yes.
When we talk about the live streaming in the classrooms, if the ventilation system isn't appropriate in the classrooms, will we be moving to a different location or to locations where the ventilation system is adequate to provide live streaming? So in other words, the schools that are in red that can't cannot do that. Is that correct?
So that just, and Neil can speak to this in more detail, and I think he has a tool he can show you that he purchased today to determine how much ventilation is in each building. But the amount of ventilation we need in a building is based on the number of bodies in the room.
Okay.
So if, we believe we can bring the teacher in one room, and there would be proper ventilation for one individual to work. And certainly we'll work with the architects on that. But Neil, I don't know if there's anything else you would like to address on that.
No, Brian, I think you covered it. As Brian said, the appropriate ventilation for any room is actually dictated by building code. There's nothing in school code that says what ventilation has to be. So we have to conform with the universal guidance on building code. And so that's 10 cubic feet per minute per person plus the square footage of the room times a multiplier of 0.12. And so it varies. So just for instance, if you have a room that's 660 square feet, for just the teacher being in there, there needs to be 89.2 cubic feet of movement. But when you have a classroom with 15 people, it jumps up to 229. So it really varies based on the bodies.
Thank you, Neil. Being married to a math geek, I always appreciate your answers. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. I always have confidence in your math skills. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
And I don't know if you can hold up the tool, Neil, but he was walking down the hall with it. It looks like a tricorder from Star Trek. It's this is what we're doing these days.
Lori Pickens has her hand up. Lori?
Yeah, hi. I got about 4 questions. First question is, what is it going to look like as far as, and I think I sent you the email, I don't know if it's an email or text message, Brian, about what will beefing up, reconnecting with our misplaced families, how, like, are we already informing the schools on how to get that reconnection going with a lot of the families that we have not heard from and we don't know where they are at this moment? How is that going to look? Is that like part of the plan or something that's in the process of being discussed since everything that happened today? I don't know if you want to answer that now, if you want me to ask my question.
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
We charged Mr. Nixon with that responsibility. I know that he's been busy this week with our anti-racism training, but he has pulled the list of students that did not complete last semester and is going to be working with the Blue Coats and our community centers to start to do some outreach here very soon. So we do have that on our radar. The plans aren't 100% finalized, but we will be talking about that early next week and starting to get out and knocking on doors to make sure we reach as many families as possible.
Is there any way that he can possibly incorporate maybe the behavior specialists out of some of the buildings? Is that a possibility, or?
That I'll add that to the list. That's something we can certainly take a look at.
And then my next question is, so the teachers, they're using the platform Schoology. I just have a question. Does that have a translating feature in it? Do we know? Does anyone know?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure if Nora is on the call, on the meeting. Nora, are you on the meeting? Lori, let me check into that and I will.
I am. I'm here, Teresa.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, it has a Google Translate tool with roughly 50 languages that are available for translation.
Okay. So so that means this on the other end, the students will have to know how to set it, or is it already going to be set for, do you understand what I'm asking you? Like if I'm the person, okay.
There's a drop down available where they can select their language. The drawback to that is, it's presuming they can read in their language, which isn't always the case with our EL students. So it's not a perfect fix, but it is, it's a good resource.
Okay, so then I guess that takes me to my question. So Neil, I sent you an email about a week ago, well, when our last meeting,
about using places in the community, schools, MCRC and all of them to do like training for families so they would know how to utilize the technology. Are we like looking at definitely pushing that forward? Considering Nora's answer just now, then we know that that our new American students will definitely need that assistance. Is that something that's like on your radar of things to push forward, or?
Neil, can I interject?
Yep.
Well, yes, that's part of we have that on our professional development plan. We're working to try and figure out how we can do that with, to keep the crowd under 25. So more to come with that. I should be able to report more next week.
Okay, and then my last question is, will the teachers be able to use their classrooms if they're going to be doing any work on the ventilation systems? Will that interfere at all, or how's that going to look for them?
Certainly, we're going to have to move people around as they work through the ventilation in the building. But typically, especially with the univentilators, that's work that's going to be done in each individual classroom. So if we have the schedule, we can certainly move a teacher for a day or half a day if we need to.
Okay. All right, that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Mr. President?
Rose?
I just have one question. With these special needs students going back in the buildings, will we have nurses at each site? Or will we just have a nurse that would go to various buildings? Because they might need medical needs, medicine.
So we are intending to bring our professional staff back, so there would be a nurse in each building.
Okay, Rose?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Nichols?
President?
Mr. Nichols?
Yes, I have some questions. Brian, do any of our ventilation systems now have HEPA filters, or can they be retrofitted for those easily?
They do not, and again, we're going to have our engineers come next week, so that's certainly a question I can pass along to them. But, and Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things they were more focused on were the UV filters. Is that correct?
Okay, that would be good
correct.
too.
Yes.
The next question I have is the live streaming, which sounds like a good idea. That was not done in the spring?
No.
Okay, so hopefully the remote learning will go better for this. I want to say I support this plan of going totally to remote as being a safe plan. My one concern is, and we have so many things to address at the same time, we're going into a depression right now. The state somehow has kept our budget where it was last year with a little sleight of hand down there. No question, we're going to have a significant drop next year in our budget. And as we all should know, about 3/4 of our money comes from the state and federal. So if they cut us 10%, that means we've got to come up with 40% locally, which is, of course, a huge amount. And the only way we can do that is to cut. So I know this plan is something that's in motion, and this switch to remote is just now happening. But what are we going to do to save money here? Where are we going to institute layoffs? I mean, if you have issues with Wilson and Edison, shouldn't they just be closed down totally and move teachers to other schools to work from them? It's going to be on a remote basis anyway. I know it's a huge amount coming at us all at once, but I'm very concerned that we need to start conserving funds now. We were not able to do it in the spring. The governor had an edict that said we had to keep everybody on the payroll through the end of the fiscal year, but we're no longer under that. And I do feel we need to be cutting back now in anticipation of what's going to be a tough year next year.
So we do have some items of discussion for personnel and executive pertaining to that, Mr. Nichols. As far as the finances go, certainly that's on our radar, but there's only so many hours in the day right now, and we're focused on getting school up and running as I indicated, once we have the end of year audit done, which we should have those numbers in September, we'll be able to turn that over to PFM and refresh our projections. And from there, we'll have some good data on where we think we're going to be for this upcoming year. And we can run some projections for the following years based on what we think will happen at the state level. At that point, I think is when we really need to start making some serious decisions. But until then, we need to be focused on getting school started and make sure that we do have solid numbers to make those type of budget decisions.
So we are not planning to initiate any layoffs until at least October?
Again, we have a couple items like that on the agenda for executive session that pertains to personnel. So I would ask that we wait and have that discussion at that point.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Everyone, a heads up. We have 5 or 6 other important matters to discuss, and then we have 4 or 5 important things in that executive session. I'm trying to do my best to get us to that point through all these things and keep ourselves fresh and focused. So if there's nothing more on this for now, and as Sumner said, this is an ongoing and developing situation, and no question has been ducked, nor will it be. But some of the answers just aren't evident at this point. So I'll ask again if there's anything else on this, and if not, we have some other things to move on to. Anyone?
Mr. President, I would ask that before we move on, if I'd like to at least get a head nod on whether or not the board is comfortable with this approach, or if there's another approach they want us to consider. And if we are comfortable with this approach, we need to modify our health and safety plan and notify our families. So that would be either a special meeting between now and next Wednesday, or bringing it for next Wednesday. But regardless, if the board wants to wait till next Wednesday to make those adjustments, I would like at least a formal blessing here that we can move ahead and start to notify families of these changes so they can start to make plans accordingly.
Mr. President, I would move that we adopt this revised plan.
Well, we don't have a motion. We can't consider a motion in this meeting, Sumner, but if he wants a head nod and then make it formally approved next Wednesday, we can do that. I guess he's asking us if he can get us a head nod so he can begin to develop it and announce to the public that that's the direction things are going in. So I'm going to assume that you're in agreement, and I'll say I'm in agreement. How about anyone else?
Just weighing in, I'm not in agreement. I think that we're doing a complete disservice to our students if we don't educate, or at least offer, even to some limited amount, face-to-face. I suspect that, I might be in the minority here, but I think this is complete overreaction in a whole lot of ways, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, anybody else?
I'm in agreement. So, as far as what we're agreeing to is that we're going to start the school year totally remote for all students, or all students except for special education students, or what am I agreeing to?
Brian, could you clarify it for her?
I put it up on the screen. So number 1 is moving the start date for students to September 8th after Labor Day. 2, offering 100% remote instruction for the first quarter for all students, except for special education and career and tech, with the goal of adjusting our elementary HVAC system so that we can bring them back for in-person instruction in the second semester. And then the 3rd is, again, offering our self-contained special education students and career and tech students the option to come in for in-person instruction because their programs are very difficult to deliver remotely.
Thank you. I can't see the screen, so that's why I asked, John. I agree.
Okay. So are you supportive of that, Angela?
Yes, I am.
Okay, but again, we'll vote on it officially on Wednesday. He's trying to get an indication now from us. So we have three yeses and a no.
Mr. President?
Okay, Darlene?
Yes, so I definitely am in agreement with 1 and 2. I still need some more questions answered in number 3. I've asked a lot of FAPE questions and special ed questions that I guess just I feel my conscience I have to look at before I totally agree to number 3. I think I had recommended to you at some point the idea of bringing our CTE kids back because they do need hands-on. So I'd love to see us be able to do that. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
We'll call that a yes until Wednesday, Darlene?
Sure.
All right, Wednesday I'll make it official though, so you have a few days to reconsider, but he wants to know, with some level of assuredness. I think I'm told we have 5 yeses and 1 no. That still leaves 2 more unheard from. Rosemary and Lori.
Oh, I'm sorry. I sent a thumbs up, but I'm for it.
All right, that's a yes.
Rose, you were on mute.
Rose?
Can't hear you.
Rose, we can't hear you.
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm for it.
Okay. All right, Mr. Polito, you got 7 people. Is Gwen with us? Okay,
Yes, Gwen is here. Gwen's here.
Yes, I'm here.
Gwen, do you want to weigh in on that? Do you support or not? Do you have questions still?
I'm listening. I support it.
Okay, you still have till Wednesday. Wednesday we'll vote on it, but he wants to get a reading now from which direction we're going because although it's fluid, he wants to get the word out to parents and begin to plan. So that's all we're doing is taking a head count here tonight.
Safety is most important, so we're good.
All right, Gwen, thank you.
Mr. President?
Mr. Walker?
The second point to Mr. Polito's question was whether the board felt comfortable waiting until Wednesday to make that vote, or if we should take a special meeting to take, say, on Friday or Monday.
I happen to think it can wait till Wednesday now that we've expressed ourselves, but if the rest of the board wants to express itself and have a meeting before Wednesday, we can do that. Anybody have a strong opinion to do it sooner than Wednesday? And if so, Friday, Monday, when?
Mr. President, I don't care either way because my answer is not going to change. But I know that a lot of parents are buying school clothes. They're in limbo. So I am for doing it sooner. It sounds like a lot of people are sure yes. It's a few people that's on the board, but on the borderline. But I know that I have a lot of parents that are just super frustrated because it's August. So I'm in favor of doing it Friday.
Okay, does anybody else want to meet on Friday to approve this formally then?
This is Tyler, Mr. President. My only concern would be that there would be a lot of discussion. My only concern would be that there would be a lot of discussion regarding this, and that people may have follow-up questions. And I don't want to rush us on our Wednesday meeting. So I guess depending upon the length that we think that we're going to need for Wednesday, that would be my only request, that if we do need more time, that we maybe do this on Friday or Monday.
So you want to pick Friday or Monday as your preference?
I'm okay with whatever. I guess I just want to, I'm leaning towards or looking at Mr. Polito to see if he feels that I just don't want to rush through anything that we're going to have next Wednesday with this, because I assume that there's going to be more questions and more dialogue around.
Okay.
Well, Mr. President?
Who's that, Darlene?
Darlene, since I'm the only one besides Tom that has any apprehension about taking this vote and supporting the plan, I don't think we would need a long meeting, but I do agree with Angela that the sooner parents know, the better. So I'm deferring right now to the administration of how long you think you need to possibly answer some questions. Would it Friday be better or would Monday be better?
Brian, they're looking to you.
I think we would be fine with Friday if that works. Again, I think if everybody's comfortable, I'm still okay if we notify parents that the official vote isn't until next Wednesday, but this is the plan. You know, if the board wants to avoid another meeting.
I would prefer to go with Brian's recommendation there, because that will give him a few more days before the meeting next Wednesday to continue to refine this plan. It's a, you know, this has been a work in process all summer. We have a major shift here, and to give him a few more days, I think it's good. It makes sense to go from meeting today to Friday. I think that's too tight.
So my question would be, Brian, is if we met Friday, are we gonna be voting on the whole plan, or are we able to at least just vote that we're going to change from from any in-person learning to just, you know, the dates that you gave us that people will go in person? That would be my thing. I just wanted to, I know you said you're gonna let the parents know that, you know, things are changing, but I feel like they deserve to have a solid answer, because some parents are trying to plan and they have no clue. So my thing would be, are we able to just have a vote just for the change in the start dates, or do we have to do it all together?
I would prefer to keep it all together, Angela, just because I don't want to piecemeal this. My recommendation would be to modify the health and safety plan accordingly, just for those 3 items that we presented to you, and bring you a modified school calendar. And those would be the 2 things that you would vote on.
Okay, so yeah, I still want to go with early, because if those are only 2 things that we're voting on, I feel like parents need to know as soon as possible. Thanks.
Okay, we have 3 people that would prefer Friday, and we have 2 that would prefer waiting till Wednesday. That's 5. We need to hear from the rest of you.
Mr. Harkins, before we go further, if I may.
Just a minute, Mr. Walker.
Mrs. Jones reminded me that we did not have adequate time to advertise for Friday, as the advertisement would be placed tomorrow. So we would have to go with a Monday.
But it has to be Monday, because we don't have time to advertise for a public meeting between now and Friday. So those of you that preferred Friday, is Monday, would Monday be your next preference?
Fine with me.
Okay, that's Angela, that's 1.
This is Tyler. I'm okay with it going till Wednesday, waiting till Wednesday, if that gives Brian more time. I just didn't want him to feel like we were jamming too much on him on Wednesday for everyone to go through. So I'm okay.
I favor the Wednesday too. 2 days isn't going to make a difference. As the superintendent said, we can give notice from this meeting how we're going to change it. It's just going to be formalized at our meeting next week. We've agreed to do this by a majority of the board.
Well, then I'll go along with the Wednesday. It doesn't matter to me, because my answer isn't changing.
All right, that's 3 for Wednesday.
John, I don't know whether I prefer Wednesday.
Tyler?
John's up now. Or
Tom, I got you in a second, but I want to be clear on Tyler. Tyler, are you saying Wednesday's okay?
Yeah, I'm fine with Wednesday.
All right. Tom?
Wednesday, please.
All right. I don't know that I have Lori or Gwen.
This is Lori. Wednesday's fine. Wednesday's fine.
Okay, Lori. That's 5, but is there anybody else who wants to be counted on it?
Mr. President,
Rose?
Wednesday's fine with me.
Okay, thank you. Gwen?
All right, I'll go with Wednesday.
All right. Who haven't we heard from? I've got...
Wednesday's fine with me, John.
Okay, Darlene. All right, Mr. Superintendent, is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. We have Teresa Zumagala next to present the Accelerated Learning Plan along with Karen Ryan. Teresa, Karen.
Thank you, Mr. President. So board members, in early summer, probably right around June 3rd, Committee of the Whole, we started talking about how we were going to address the unfinished learning and the unfinished instruction from the spring. So we also brought that up July 7th in the Leadership Forum. And you've heard us talk about taking an accelerated approach rather than using a remediation approach. I want the board to understand this doesn't mean we're just going to fast forward through curriculum and materials. We have been We'll continue to be very intentional in our planning, pacing, and professional development moving forward with this plan. Karen Ryan, our Director of Teaching and Learning, will go into a little bit further detail so you have a better understanding. Karen?
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Let me share my screen here. Here we go. And I just want to kind of, I appreciate everyone's time as we really start to talk about the instruction piece. I know that there's been a lot of really hard decisions that have needed to be made, and now it's time for us to talk about the instruction that's going to happen with our kids. Just to norm us all on a definition of unfinished instruction, due to the transition to at-home learning, we will need to attend unfinished instruction. Unfinished instruction is a combination of teaching and learning occurring within the academic year that fails to provide students with opportunity to demonstrate proficiency with grade level skills. In order to address unfinished instruction, we will need to focus not only on what was not learned, but the opportunity students had to learn content in the first place. So that being said, we know that students perhaps didn't have the opportunity to accomplish what was in our curriculum because of this interrupted learning. And also we had students that perhaps did not reach proficiency in the standards for the grade level that they were in. What is on the screen right here is a graph from NWEA research. And what this graph really helps us to see is this is a national graph. So this is not a graph unique to Erie's public schools, but it really helps us see what typical growth in a school year would look like, the solid lines, with summer learning loss. That is kind of the traditional pattern of what happens. What this graph also shows us, with the dotted line down the middle of the graph with a more solid dotted line in each color, is what they anticipate as far as growth based on the COVID slowdown. And then what you see in the little smaller dotted lines is what they're anticipating being the COVID slide. That being said, NWEA is estimating that students will roughly enter back into the fall of 2020 in ELA with about 70% of their learning gains that they had for the school year. Please notice that the gap in our primary grades is larger than the gap as we move up in grade levels. As we look into mathematics, we can see that math is even a bigger problem. Again, the graph is set up very similarly. Students are likely to show much smaller learning gains, returning with less than 50% in some cases up to 70% less learning gains than what they typically would come back with, which could mean some of our students coming back nearly a year behind what they would be coming back in normal conditions. And again, this is a national phenomenon. This is what they're predicting across the country. So, how are we going to plan to address this moving forward? So what our plan is to follow a few guiding principles. First and foremost, we need to put our students, families, and our Erie Public School family first. We're really going to approach this with an accelerate, don't remediate approach, keeping it simple and keeping it focused. Research tells us that there's some guiding principles that will help us with this process. In 2018, TNTP released findings from a 3-year study of diverse school systems across the United States. And from these findings came recommendations. And on your screen, you can see all students need and deserve consistent access to grade level curriculum. Students starting the school year below grade level benefit most from on-grade level instruction. And lastly, high quality instructional materials are a key lever for ensuring students are engaging with grade level content. And we've made a lot of positive steps in that direction with curriculum adoptions over the last 2 years. So our focus is going to be on acceleration. Based on guidance from national organizations like the Council for Great City Schools, Student Achievement Partners, TNTP, Unbound Ed, strategic planning across grade levels to identify opportunities to address unfinished or missed learning from previous grade level in the upcoming grade level. So we're really going to concentrate on coherent content and context, making sure that we are understanding where the on-ramps will be for students and utilizing just-in-time strategies. We're going to stay the course with our high-quality curriculum. So in that regard, leaning into the instructional shifts required for best practices in English language arts, our acceleration plan guides us to identify and address potential gaps in knowledge versus isolating standards for reteaching. We plan to stay the course with our high quality curriculum, and we plan to attend to foundational reading skills. In mathematics, the instructional shifts for best practice will require us to focus on the major work of the grade, trace the coherence of the standards across grade levels to identify opportunities to address unfinished learning from previous grades within current and upcoming grades. And lastly, while we're talking about all of these academic considerations, we really need to be paying close attention to our students' social and emotional growth while we're paying attention to their academic development. So within classrooms and schools, attention must be given to restoring relationships, a sense of community, so our students feel safe, engage fully, and work hard. Students will need help knowing that caring adults believe in them and that in their ability, and that their competence will grow with their effort. And more than ever, students need to see the value and relevance in what they're learning in their lives and in their very being. There's a few slides toward the end of this presentation that I'm not going to go through that give some examples of what that might look like in English language arts and mathematics specifically. Lastly, our work plans. So during this summer and in the next few weeks, we're going to continue to prioritize content. We're going to predict unfinished learning. We're going to look at what was taught and what wasn't taught in the COVID closure period. We're going to utilize benchmark assessment data from early in the year. We're going to consider adaptations to pacing guides and plan for regularly diagnosing unfinished learning. During our school year, our teachers will continue again to really invest in the vision. Teachers will have training and support to continually monitor student progress and to adjust teaching and learning strategies.
Board members, any questions for Karen or Teresa on this?
Yes.
Mr. Sumner Nichols first, and I didn't hear who was second. Was it an echo or was that just something?
Yeah, there probably was an echo. Karen,
okay,
is,
double Sumner.
In order to establish the baseline here, are we giving some kind of a standardized exam? I know we didn't have the exams in the spring. I know they were bad a year prior to that, except at collegiate, pretty much. You know, that's an area of concern for all of us. But to get this baseline on how far they're behind, are you giving some kind of a standardized test, or how are you doing that?
Sure, absolutely. Mr. Nichols, there will be benchmark assessments given in all grade levels. So there will be the iReady mathematics benchmark exam in K through 8. There'll be the DIBELS exam for early foundational skills in K3. There'll be the CDT, which is a diagnostic Pennsylvania state test in our English language arts classes. And also in our high school algebra courses. So that will help us get kind of that initial benchmark data, and then we'll be using formative assessments for each kind of unit of study as kids go, so that we can really kind of delve deeper into how we're going to help them really get into that on grade level learning so that we don't perpetuate gaps.
Now these benchmark tests, I know it's going to be a different test than what the state gives, but would it be something you could look back at those and say, well, it looks like we've slipped at Harding, or we've gone up somewhat at Grover Cleveland, compared to those last state tests, despite it being a different test, that you could at least give some indication to the board, because I know you have this new curriculum, but then we had the shutdown. I mean, we've had a plus and a minus, and everybody, of course, is anxious to find out how we're doing overall. So will you be able to assess that for us at some point?
So we won't be able to compare, like, I don't want to say apples and oranges. So we
Right.
won't be able to compare our diagnostic or our benchmark test to our PSSA test from a year ago. But what we will be able to look at is we will be able to look at and see how kids did on their diagnostic the last time we gave it. We will be able to compare how our kids coming in on this diagnostic versus the diagnostic that they took at the beginning of last year, just to kind of gauge where we are. And we can see that from child to class to grade to school to district level. So we will be able to look at that kind of thing.
Good, because I'm sure all of us would like to hear some report on that, because it is unsettling that, you know, it wasn't our fault. Those exams weren't given this year, and to go 2 years without a benchmark would be bad. So I'm glad you're trying to overcome that.
Absolutely. We do have that assessment schedule and calendar set up that we'll use.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mrs. Feeney?
Thank you, Mr. President. Karen, being a former special ed and elementary teacher, I know you probably can imagine that I'm really excited about what you and Teresa have put together. I love the accelerated versus the remediation approach. And I really, really applaud you for pointing out that we do need that social emotional growth aspect in our plans. So that's very well done. My question is with the high school level courses, because in each grade level, they're taking different courseworks that aren't necessarily the same. So for example, you know, we're taking biology, let's say, is that freshman year? Then, and again, I don't know high school now. So what are we taking sophomore year? Is it chemistry, or is that junior year? So how are we going to be able to fill in those gaps for our high school students?
So I think as far as the gaps go, Darlene, the process really, although it kind of says English language arts or mathematics, I think the processes are similar, right? We have to be able to figure out what is the knowledge that our students have or don't have that's prerequisite to the content that they need. And so our teachers are really going to have to be thinking about when their courses have prerequisite standards. So in mathematics, it's pretty consistent that mathematics is coherent the way our standards are built. Learning builds on learning. So our teachers are really going to need some support in utilizing tools that are in their curriculum and perhaps some other resources that are built out that help them trace those progressions. Because if we don't have those on-ramps, teachers are going to be spinning their wheels as children are, our students are, because they don't have the necessary prerequisite knowledge to do what's being asked. So I'm not sure if I answered your question or if you need more clarity, but I think some of it is going to be definitely knowing what the students, what knowledge they have, and working from there to build that knowledge up.
Having never taught high school curriculum, I guess I feel like I would probably need to ask the experts on that. And I'm sure that that's what you're going to do when you do your training. I figured that was probably a question that would be floating out there.
We have fabulous content experts in our middle schools and high schools. And I think it's just having the conversations to identify some of these on-ramps to make sure our kids are successful.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions on this? Next up is the professional development schedule. Teresa?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to share my screen and show the board a draft of our professional development plan, which is ever changing. So this is the latest, and you can see the draft watermark. This is the latest. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but try and show the board just some clusters that we have. We've already done some training in July for our iReady, and we had athletics. Coming into this week, Mr. Nixon is completing Leaders for Just Schools for our administrators, which will be a turnkey training for our teachers when we get back into the buildings with our teachers. The week of August 10th, we will release some of the Schoology information. So we'll have the introductory videos in Safe Schools for our teachers. And we will also post some of the initial videos online on our website for our students and parents, just an introduction. So that will be released next week. Also next week, we have lined up a training for our nurses. If they are interested, it's a course from Johns Hopkins about contact tracing with COVID-19. So we will be putting that out as well for Act 48 credits. Moving through that week, we will be training our administrators and engineers, myself and Mr. Brockman, about the expectations protocols in our health and safety plans. So we will be working with some of those changes and turning that professional development over to our building staff. Then when we get into the week of August 17th, we'll start having some trainings from Schoology, which is company training. They will train our people who, again, will turnkey that training to the rest of our staff. Looking at the first day for teachers, which is August 25th, we will have our normal superintendent message and staff meetings. The afternoon is to be determined, but this is really the cluster I want to make the board aware of. If we do change the student start day, that gives us 4 additional days of training. And these are just some of the things that we're brainstorming right now, which is why I have all those dates together. We will have to get our folks up to speed with all of the technology changes and the new programming. We are working on distance learning strategies, curriculum implementation in the virtual learning environment, assessment in that same environment, just some minor Infinite Campus, our student information system, some minor training with that. We'll be working through committees with our accelerated learning work plans. Bringing Mr. Nixon's training, the anti-racism training into this. We'll be doing Leaders for Just Schools, the day 1. We have to get a teacher prep in there. We have to train FERPA in the online environment. We have some handle with care training, and we are forming COVID response teams in each of the buildings, and Neil and I will be working with our building principals to deliver that training. Then taking us a little bit further into September, we will be finishing up the Leaders for Just Schools training. That gets us to October 19th. November 3rd, Election Day is to be determined at this point. So we will evaluate where we are and what steps we need to take moving forward. And that already takes us to the end of the first quarter, which is November 4th, as we'll reevaluate. Just a note for the board, department trainings are also being planned at this time. I don't have every single training on here. And it will be adjusted as we finalize the return plans. It's not an exhaustive list, but I wanted to highlight the major initiatives. Also, I think, Ms. Pickens, this addresses the question you were asking earlier. We're exploring additional training opportunities in addition to the virtual trainings for Schoology, Microsoft Teams for families, including the possibility of hosting small group sessions at buildings. And trying to organize that with the numbers that we can work with safely.
Nice, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any questions on this before we move on to the next? Okay, next is the student handbook and dress code. Teresa, you and Jennifer.
Yes, if I could just speak about the dress code before Attorney Gornall talks a little bit more about the minor changes to the handbook. We did receive, as I'm sure the board has as well, concerns from parents about the dress code for this year, expressing difficulty in shopping, in finding clothing to have students ready for the school year. Concerns that if we did go remote, students would grow out of them. Some concerns from our administration, if there were dress code violations, congregation offices We also do loan some clothing to our students, so we thought that would be a potential issue. So what we're proposing to the board is that in the handbook, we leave the general rules regarding student dress, but we relax the actual dress code policies where we get into the specifics about solid colors and Docker style pants and those types of things. And that's on page 7 and 8 of the student handbook. Are there any questions about the dress code? Attorney Cornell, did you want to go over the other changes?
Yep, I'm ready. In addition to us deleting the specific language about the dress code, we added to the portion of the handbook that speaks to student dress, we added a mask policy, in essence, which explains or articulates the district's position, although this is much less relevant now that it looks like we're not going to be going back into the classroom full force, at least at the beginning of the school year, but presuming we do, hopefully soon, the mask wearing rule, and that a student's refusal to wear a mask, if they don't otherwise qualify for an exemption that's articulated by the Department of Health or the Pennsylvania Department of Education for mask wearing, that would result in him or her having to be educated through one of the district's remote learning pathways for health and safety reasons. So we're going to try to avoid using traditional disciplinary responses to a refusal to wear masks and not referring the child for suspension or expulsion, but instead, if they're refusing to comply with the district's health and safety plan about mandated mask wearing, then they will be required to participate via one of our remote learning options. Another thing that we added to the student handbook was we made it clear that when the superintendent is requested by a family for him to approve a family vacation during the school year, we put language in there that if a family is requesting to travel to a governor designated hotspot, then the superintendent is not authorized to approve that trip, that family trip, unless the family agrees to, in essence, quarantine their children for 14 calendar days upon the family's return from the trip, and the family agrees to utilize one of the district's remote learning pathways during that 14 calendar day period of time. And the other language that we added to that section in attendance is that the district is requesting that parents and students who return from travel to a governor designated hotspot, because we're not going to catch all of them by going on a family trip that the superintendent has to approve, because some families could be going for a long weekend that we otherwise had in the calendar, or over Thanksgiving break, or over the holiday break at Christmas time. So we're asking that they, in essence, self-report if they're returning from a vacation to a hotspot, and that they agree to voluntarily keep their children home for 14 calendar days, utilizing the district's remote learning options during that period of time. And if they do that, they will not even be deemed to be absent from school, because they'll be participating in the receipt of their education through the remote learning. If they refuse to do that, we would, at the very least, excuse their absences during that period of time. We talked about mandating that, but under the school code as it currently exists, and under the current orders from the Department of Ed and the governor, we don't think we have the power to force that quarantine, but we're asking them for their cooperation and trying to handle it that way. We also, let me see, there's a few others that we did in the past that I wanted to draw to your attention. We revised pursuant to changes to the school code about a year ago that just went into effect this summer. We changed the compulsory school age. Starting at 8 years, it's now 6 years. And it used to be until the child reaches the age of 17. Now it's until the child reaches the age of 18. So we extended the years of compulsory school attendance for your students, which is a good thing, because it's going to catch a lot more of the seniors, that they are compulsorily mandated to come to school. We also added some provisions that we felt were important, again, because of the COVID situation. Another section in the attendance was that we clarified that students who are participating in virtual, distance, or remote learning due to the COVID-19 pandemic, that compulsory school attendance and truancy rules apply to those students who are receiving their instruction through distance or remote learning. And we explained that a student's failure to participate in the required number of hours for those through those remote learning platforms can result in that their failure to participate as an unexcused absence from school, with an ultimate possible consequence of truancy prosecution. Now, I also put language in there that says that if students are struggling with participation in their distance learning through accessibility issues with technology or any other reason, such as maybe a disability, students and their parents are encouraged to communicate with the district officials for assistance prior to compulsory attendance becoming an issue. So what we're saying is, if you're having trouble accessing your remote learning platform for any reason, whether it be technology or your disability, you need to let us know that so that the district can work with them on it before we start sending them notices that they're not complying with compulsory school attendance requirements. We also added a section to the Student Code of Conduct that when students are receiving their instruction through virtual, online, or distance learning platforms, that the district's rules apply in those situations. So if a student is being disrespectful to a teacher or other classmates when they're using their Schoology and participating in lessons synchronously, but in their homes, we can still discipline them for that, or that we have an expectation that the district's rules still apply to them. They have to be dressed relatively appropriately. They can't be wearing almost no clothes, or we have to make sure that that what they're wearing is appropriate for being in a school setting where people can see each other. So we just wanted to clarify to students that it's going to be different, but we still have behavioral expectations for them that we are going to enforce even in the distance learning venue. And then finally, at the very first micro baby step into making our code of conduct much more positive leaning as opposed to disciplinary, we change the verbiage of disciplinary actions to consequences throughout the code of conduct. And like I said, that's the first micro step into a bigger project that we will all be engaging with. We are incorporating SWIBIS types of concepts into the code of conduct. So those are the major changes that were made. We are going to have to make some changes for the Title IX section. We will be doing that within the next week or so, because we're just getting other policies and information across the state about that now. But those are the major changes that we wanted you to be aware of as of tonight.
Attorney Gornall, would you clarify, most of what you said had to do with adjusting to the pandemic problems, and you use the word deleting language. Are we actually deleting it and then needing to come back at some future time and change it, or are we suspending for the period of the uncertainty?
You're talking about the dress code deletion? That's really the only thing we deleted was the dress code.
When you use the word delete, that's what got my attention. I just wonder if it's a permanent deletion, or is it understood that it's a suspension during this period?
Well, it's a permanent deletion for this school year, and I think that's the message that the administration wanted to get out to the families and the students, because we wanted them to feel comfortable that we're not going to suspend the dress code for the first quarter or the first semester, but then force them to go out and buy dress code compliant clothes in January or February, which is really hard to do. Stores don't have that type of clothing usually at that time of the year, and that would be an expense to parents. So we did intend to delete it for this entire school year, but it's certainly something that can be discussed and brought back, when the pandemic is over.
Understood. Thank you. Any board members, questions, comments?
Mr. President,
Glenn?
what is your definition of a face mask? Because there's various types of face masks on the CDC and the Department of Health webpage. So are students going to be penalized if they wear a bandana? What definition are you using for a face mask?
Mr. President, I can answer that for Gwen, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, Gwen, if you look at the language that's in the student handbook, and you might not even have the revised one yet, so it would be impossible for you to do that. I actually defined what face mask or face coverings are in that section of the handbook, and I used verbatim the Pennsylvania Department of Health's definition of face covering, which definitely is very broad, and it includes factory made, sewn by hand, improvised household items, including but not limited to scarves, bandanas, t-shirts, sweatshirts, or towels. And it also includes face shields. We also put in the policy that if students don't have their own personal face coverings, that the district will provide that for them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Mr. President.
Tyler?
Thank you. Attorney Garnell, I just had a couple. Like the compulsory school age, is that determined by district or state?
The state.
The state? Okay, so I was just curious because I wasn't sure if OCY, their truancy, just making sure that they're aware. But if it's a state thing, then they're going to be aware.
They would be aware of it.
Then the other one that I had was the Title VII ruling that came out this summer.
Title IX. You mean Title IX?
No, Title. It wasn't.
Sex?
Yes. Was it Title IX? Am I getting them back reversed in my brain? Yeah, maybe I am getting reversed.
Oh!
You
mean
how that Title IX typically emulates the language within Title VII, I guess. So
are you
is that
talking about with regard to transgender students?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. See, you know where I'm going typically with questions.
I didn't. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Is that going to impact are we going to need to update any policies, or was that what you were referencing when we were going to look at stuff later?
No, what I was referencing, sort of both. What I was referencing is in mid-May, the United States Department of Education promulgated an extensive overhaul of Title IX regulations. Title IX is sex discrimination and sex harassment. It is very controversial what these regulations say for a number of substantive reasons. And it also requires a lot of significant procedural changes for Title IX sex discrimination, but it doesn't follow with all the other categories of protected class discrimination. But what the Title IX new regulations expressly did not address was whether or not the definition of sex encompassed on the basis of transgenderism and those issues. But interestingly, coincidentally, about a month later, there was a United States Supreme Court case decided under Title VII, which is what you were referencing, that specifically did include those classes under the umbrella of sex under Title VII. Historically, Title IX has followed Title VII's definition, or how it defines the sex, that term. And so, yes, I would say that in my opinion, I would say at this point under Title IX, there's a very good argument that that the definition of sex does encompass discrimination on the basis of that expanded understanding of what sex means. And I would have clarified that in our Title IX policy already, but we have this giant change, so it will be taken care of in those changes. So that was a long answer. There's a lot of stuff going on in that world of the law that we've all been ignoring because of COVID.
What do you mean there's a lot going on? I don't even know what you're talking about. Then the last thing that this may, I think, be with you, Jen, and also Mr. Polito, is when we have students who are gender expansive, who are logging on, who are going by a different name, are they able to use that name on the online platform? Because I did have some students who had reached out who were just experiencing a lot of dysphoria, increasing anxiety, because they would log on and their birth name would have, that maybe other students didn't know, would show up, and then they would now see.
I would recommend to the district that they accommodate those requests. I bet the problem might be the technology, and I'm not an IT person, and I don't think Mr. Polito is either, but I'm sure that's something the district can figure out.
I believe actually that in the Schoology platform, Nora, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a place where a student can put their preferred name in. So, and that's what would be, that's what would show on the screen.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Anyone else on this? Okay, next is 2021 athletics. Mr. Polito and Mr. Brockman.
Well, as I informed you earlier this week, I'm sure you saw that the PIAA decided to move ahead with fall sports, and just today, the District 10 decided to start the season as scheduled, which is certainly a concern among the Erie County superintendents. We actually sent a joint statement to them expressing our concerns about starting the season, and we would only support it if it was backed by solid safety protocols. We have not heard back from them on that. For us here in Erie School District, we met today to talk a little bit about that. As it appears, just like everything else, the decision is going to be pushed down to the local school district. Right now, we have with our health and safety plan in place, some of our teams are doing the conditioning work, that's the skills and drills. All of that is being done outside. We are not allowing students in to the building. The weight room is closed. We would like to at least continue to do that and allow them to do that skill work, following all the protocols in the health and safety plan, including appropriately social distancing and not sharing equipment. The first competition that we have on the books is the football game with prep on August 28th. So we do have some time to see if there is any other guidance that comes from the state on that. If there isn't, and more than likely there won't be, we would likely be coming to the board and recommending that we not participate in contact sports in the fall, because we just can't see how we can do that safely, and that would be football, soccer, and volleyball. We do feel that some of the non-contact sports we could proceed with, including golf, tennis, and cross country. But again, we'd like a little more time to see if any further guidance comes out, or if there's any other decisions from the PIAA or District 10.
Ryan, what was the word they used? Did they say the season should begin on as usual, shall begin, or can begin?
Shall.
So if we choose not to, are we risking any problems with them?
They said that if we decide to start later or not participate at all, that it would not be held against us.
Okay. Anyone on this?
Mr. President,
Darlene?
it's Darlene. I did try to text a few people. My internet went out, so I apologize. I missed a lot of what we were just discussing. Brian, maybe I could talk to you after the meeting. You could get me caught up on what I all missed.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Anything on athletics as the superintendent described today's news? Okay, next is the real estate tax schedule. Mr. Polito and Attorney Wachter.
Yes, we just wanted to make you aware of some legislation that passed recently, allowing us the latitude to adjust our discount periods and our penalty periods. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Wachter to detail what our options are. And then I have some options that I can put on the screen showing if we decided to make some changes, what that would impact the budget, or how that would impact the budget.
On July 23rd, the governor signed into law Act 75 of 2020, which amended the local tax collection law, giving school districts the opportunity for the school year that begins July 1st of 2020, the opportunity by majority vote, by resolution, to extend the time period that qualifies taxpayers for a discount, so to extend the discount period, or waive a penalty for failure to make timely payment of any such taxes on real estate charged against them, or both. If we were to do that, we'd have to adopt that resolution and immediately deliver it to people listed in the statute. But nonetheless, so there's an option now that is available to school boards to extend the discount period, waive the penalty, or do both of those two items. And I believe Mr. Polito has a recommendation.
Mr. Polito?
I'm going to share my screen with you. So what we're really talking about is October, November, and December. We currently have a 2% discount period that runs through September 30th. We're in the middle of that right now. So the options that we really would have would be to extend that discount period, the 2% discount, through October and November. And then the other option we would have would be to waive the 10% penalty in December. So what you're looking at here is the face value collections for the last tax cycle. So if we were to decide to waive or extend the discount period for one more month to October, it would result in an estimated $114,000 decrease in our revenues because we would have that 2% continue on. Extending that to both October and November would result in a reduction of $190,000. The penalty generates about $92,000 in revenue. So I think all in, we would be looking at a reduction of $283,000 if we decided to do this. And at this point, it's not my recommendation that we consider making these changes. If you recall, we decided not to do a tax increase this year, and I feel like that is the way that we address some of the issues that are happening here in the community. The other concern that I have with making these changes midstream is the confusion it'll cause, and we do have a number of taxpayers that do pay on the installment payment period, so they pay through December at face value, equal monthly payments. So if we were to make some adjustments to the discount period, we would have to go back and try to make adjustments to all those taxpayers as well and give them refunds. And I'm not sure that that's something that the Treasury's Department could handle.
Mr. President?
Mr. Nichols?
I agree with the superintendent on that. I own quite a bit of real estate in town, and I've got a lot of school tax bills that just came. So they would have to be reprinted if we try to change it for this year. And with interest rates as low as they are, I don't know if we have this ability next year to consider, but a 2% discount is, I think, too generous when rates are as low as they are currently. That's all I have on that. Thank you.
Anyone else on this? Brian, if we do nothing, things remain as they are, and if a majority of the board wants to do something, we'd have to enact a resolution, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Does anybody feel strongly that they want to do those, go in that direction with extending and eliminating the discount deadline? Well, for now, things will remain as is, I assume, and then we probably do have a little more time, but thank you for that insight, Mr. Superintendent. Attorney Walker, did you have anything more on this?
If I could address one item raised by Mr. Nichols, the local tax collection law sets the minimum discount to be 2%.
Okay, anything on the new business draft edition that jumps out at you? If not, we have five important matters, at least 5 in the executive session that's looming. So is there anything else that any director wants to talk about in the public session?
Mr. President, we do have one item that we would like to add to supplemental, and Mr. Brockman has some more information on that.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Neil.
So I'd like to add the contract that we have with Mercyhurst University for the behavioral analysis for the autistic support program that happens over at Jefferson. It did not make it to the deadline on Friday. I would like the board's permission to add it to supplemental. This is a program that we've basically had with Mercyhurst University since 2012. We've got it's graduate assistants from Mercyhurst who work with our students in that building through that autistic support program. I'd like to make sure that we can get that approved before the start of the school year.
Any board members?
Mr. President, I have a lot of concerns about bringing college students into our buildings when they're coming back from all over the country. So I guess I just would like us to really look at that. If they are going to be coming into our buildings, I know that we're going to be moving our start date back, but certainly those students would have to quarantine themselves for 2 weeks and follow the Pennsylvania guidelines. And I have a lot of concerns about us bringing more people into the schools.
Are you okay?
I guess I'd like to refer to the county health department on what their what they think about that as well.
Are you okay with Neil allowing you to put this on the agenda under supplemental? Because if it does, then you can express yourself and vote accordingly on that. Just can he bring it to us Wednesday under supplemental?
Sure.
And knowing your question, perhaps have an answer for us as best he can, and you will have the opportunity then to express yourself.
Sure, thank you.
Is that okay, Darlene?
Sure. And Neil, I can email you any questions too as well. Thank you.
Sounds good. And Mr. President, we can put this on as an item for discussion at the committee of the whole. And that is a very good point. I think we need to put some protocols in place in that contract to ensure that they are following CDC and Department of Health guidelines.
Okay.
And then I'll be scanning 38th Street for all the parties that are going on and calling the police. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Okay, if that's all for the public meeting, we'll take a 2 or 3 minute pause, and then we have some important things. So freshen up and try to be fresh and focused in a few minutes, board members, for the executive session. So we'll end the public session of this committee of the whole meeting now and ask everyone who's not authorized to be in the executive